think it's time for Jack to let her rip. I'm here to burn your shitty company to the ground. Big mistake!
Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance is a mistake. Wait, did I just say that?
Oh, what, you gonna cry? You gonna cry now?
So, you know, the game that slashed its way back on the scene back in 2013 turned the MGS series as we know it completely upside down. It completely changed the dynamics of what we loved about the series. It no longer pulls from its predecessors. Its intense infiltration stealth mechanics, its weapon gathering and interactions with hand-to-hand combat. Oh yeah, and there's no Snake. But let's not forget the overall blueprints that make MGS that the game is known for is really not there. It's not that it's a bad game, it's just not Metal Gear as we know it. As a standalone game referred to as Metal Gear Rising rather than Solid kinda sums it up in its title, to be honest. Announced at E3 in 2009, the fans were naturally excited for the return of the Metal Gear game. Quite naturally. It was presented at the time simply as Metal Gear Rising, most likely because of the absolute boner fest it caused across the world, knowing that a new Metal Gear game was on the horizon.
Because I have a boner. Oh.
I have a boner.
Okay.
I have a boner.
I have a boner.
I have a boner.
I have a boner.
I have a boner. I have a boner.
I have a boner.
The teaser clearly showcased Raiden in all his cybergenetic getup. It looked epic. It was at this time that Microsoft E3 2009's press conference, Hideo Kojima officially announced it. Originally set between the events of Metal Gear 2 and Metal Gear Solid 4, Rising was going to explain how Raiden became the character that he did in MGS4. At E3 2010, the debut trailer for the game was shown and its gameplay was clearly different from the final release. Kojima Productions aimed to create a game that blended stealth elements with a realistic swordplay mechanic. And the E3 2010 demo highlighted a precision cutting system, allowing players to slice objects and enemies at specific angles, emphasizing the weight and deliberateness of each sword strike. It was this approach that intended to maintain the series' stealth roots whilst introducing a new layer of combat complexity. The team encountered challenges in integrating this mechanic into a cohesive gameplay experience. The precision cutting, whilst innovative, was difficult to balance with fluid combat and often disrupted the game's pacing. Which is a shame, because looking back on the early footage, the combat felt like it had more weight behind it and didn't feel as loose as a old vagina, as the final result we got.
2 to the 1, from the 1 to the 3. I like good pussy and I like good trees. Smoke so much weed you wouldn't believe, and I get more ass than a toilet seat.
As a result, development stalled and the project was eventually handed over to Platinum Games, known for their expertise in fast-paced action titles.
答えを出してくれるようなところっていうのを考えた時にやっぱりプラチナさんしかこう思い浮かばなかったので、すぐ連絡を取ってですね、年明けにお会いして、相談をしました。
They reimagined the game to align with their strengths. They shifted the focus from stealth and precision to high-speed stylized combat, resulting in a more arcade-like experience similar to the games like Bayonetta and Vanquish. So there was a new Zandatsu system, which had been tweaked and rebalanced for quick gameplay and slowed the action down for the audience to take in the slicing and dicing in a cinematic way. Ultimately, the game worked well. The gameplay instantly, as when I played it, reminded me of a great hack and slash game such as Devil May Cry. and similar mechanics from Castlevania for quick-time events. It contained all the elements that felt like an MGS game, from the eccentric characters,
Like I said, kids are cool, Jack. And I'm very in touch with my inner child.
humorous moments,
Hikari-chan, so kawaii.
and the larger-than-life bosses.
Nanomachines, son. They harden in response to physical trauma.
And Raiden himself, of course, I mean, come on. Which was a welcoming return for a face that some fans were happy to see again.
What are you saying? I'm saying Jack is back.
In terms of what the game sets out to do, which isn't to be a stealth game, obviously, let's be honest. Sure, you can be stealthy, but the game is more driven in the action-paced fighting. Essentially, the team set out to create the game we know. For a beat-em-up hack-and-slash fan, this game was your wet dream, and truthfully, this is what I like about the game. It doesn't try to be something it's not. It's fast-paced, it's chaotic, and loaded with several heavy metal bangers mixed with a bit of dubstep that collide fiercely with intense battle situations in the game that are perfectly placed for cinematic and emotional quality. I felt it too when I played. Fighting bosses like Mistral when that epic chorus comes blasting in, giving you goosebumps and the urge to smash the shit out of them buttons like never before. Or when you're fighting Senator Armstrong and that badass "it has to be this way" comes on, which is what makes the game great because it keeps the qualities of what we loved about the classic video games previously before, and that shit works. Ridiculous bosses with fight patterns we have to decipher. Honestly, it was my favourite part about the game. Now, sure, the main gameplay was fun. Decapitating cyborgs like human vending machines with a Zandatsu and then being lectured about it in typical Metal Gear fashion for what's right and wrong, but the truth is, it gets repetitive after a while. There really isn't much calm in this game before a storm. It's just a whirlwind of absolute mayhem before it's turned up to 11 and some mad mech fight. Which, in all fairness, Rising had a decent enemy variation which encouraged you to upgrade your cybergenetic features, which made it well balanced in that sense. Enemies weren't just sponging attacks. If you had leveled important features on your weapons and suit as well as attacks. The level design at times was fun but also boring in areas. I absolutely loved some of the aesthetic of the game and the designs of Yoji Shinkawa's creative thinking that seeped through it. And places like the Japanese garden was a cool little area.
Sounds fancy.
A Japanese garden, to be precise. It is an area set aside for VIPs.
But without sucking the game off any longer, if you guys have played, you know what you like and what you don't, regardless of what I'm going to say, and I don't think it really warrants a 3-hour video to explain exactly why this is. I mean, we've all got a life to try live, right? And it's not just that, attention spans are slowly dwindling over the years.
Love you guys, let's watch this.
Anyway, I think it's a subject that doesn't really get spoke about. You know, why Metal Gear Solid Rising is just overrated. That definitely gets far too much hype for them what it's worth. I mean, it's this edgy, hype, meme trip fest, and to be honest, it is pretty funny at times.
A utopia of death. Aaron's force, go! Now there's a pretty meme. Yes,
I enjoyed the game, but truth be told, I'm not really a fan of fast-paced games with mechanics that feel arcadey and lack weight to them. In my personal view, I prefer games that build the tension in moments that feel powerful, rather than overloading them at a million miles per hour to the point where the shit gets hard to digest. To be honest, it should be called Metal Gear ADHD. What Metal Gear Rising lacked for me was what the previous entries nailed. And yes, I've already expressed in the ladder I'm aware of what I was signing up for, but the previous titles don't pressure you into hack and slash battles. It gave room for you to decide the best method to tackle your approach, and isn't that what Metal Gear's about? The freedom of choice is what I loved in the previous MGS games, where there were highs and lows. It was the perfect roller coaster, and you could get off at any time. Rising just felt forced and too direct, a roller coaster that, whilst super exciting and fun, leaves you with a bad stomachache. The gripe I have, here we go, is the story elements behind this game. As a Metal Gear enthusiast, I have to disapprove. Yes, whilst the feel and the elements of the codec and the epic talks of right and wrong and philosophies before an epic showdown were all retained like some anime epic wet dream, but the truth be told, there were a lot of characters I didn't give a shit about. I mean, especially on Raiden's side.
A ninja! Cowabunga! Go ninja, go!
Hey! Shut the fuck up!
However, in terms of antagonist, Desperado were incredible, and they really capture what an MGS boss is all about.
How about shit? Is that a meme? You can't fight nature, Jack. Wind blows, rain falls, and the strong prey upon the weak. Ugh. Sam tells me you see your weapon as a tool. Something that saves lives, a means of justice.
There were tons of variety of attacks and weapons they could come at you with, and given the nature of the game and because it was intended to be a standalone game, unless Konami decide to drop number 2 for some pointless reason, it doesn't feel like a game that wants to stick around for too long. And it doesn't invest you as much as other titles in the Metal Gear series. I noticed this game appeals to a younger audience, and, well, not to be biased to upset my democratic friends, even the elders that quite naturally would gravitate towards its charm, because I did as well, but not to the extent of calling it a classic or the greatest Metal Gear Solid game ever made. The level of hype the game surrounds elevates it into something that it's really not. It's a fun game, nothing more. To call it an absolute piece of cinema is some new age bullshit.
Like, oh my gosh, the voice box is an idiot. This is absolute cinema.
But the story, nonetheless, whilst interesting, just seems soulless.
Now you're just being nasty.
Protect the president. Here are the bad guys. Kill tons of cyborgs. It honestly just felt like the game was trying to cosplay itself of its predecessors. You know, instead of driving from its own narrative, which, let's be honest, it kinda needed. It simply wouldn't be Metal Gear without someone we're familiar with, let's be honest. If we weren't playing as Raiden in the story, would honestly any of you guys give a shit? Which brings me to the argument of the bait and switch in Metal Gear Solid 2. When the trailer first appeared, everyone assumed we would be playing as the legendary Solid Snake from Metal Gear Solid 1.
Not yet, Snake! It's not over yet!
And what a disaster it was when people find out we actually weren't. I remember seeing my brother rage and get confused when Raiden takes the mask off in the elevator. It was hilarious. Who is this blonde-haired Solid Snake pretty boy wannabe?
Man, this is some bullshit! Boo this man!
But as the game went on, we became more invested in Raiden and his story, which Kojima does amazingly well in character building. Over the course of the intense narrative of the game, we're drawn to Raiden's struggles and by extension, feel like an extension of him. We're the fans of the legend Snake, and he appears to be dead and gone, when in reality he's with us all along, helping us complete our mission and guiding us towards the end of the game. Isn't it ironic nobody noticed Raiden was based around us? The disappointment when you thought Snake was dead and gone? The legends we so fell in love with, discarded by the man himself, acknowledging that legends are fabricated and that he is just a soldier, not a hero, not to be martyred like the fans did. We came to respect Raiden towards the game, embraced him into the family because the narrative was perfectly placed, about forcing some soulless empty storyline like The Last of Us 2 with a protagonist trying to push a political agenda through a cuckold director with no sense of direction, who completely destroyed a narrative that at first was going perfectly well up until he decided to push the message and hire new people in to rechange the story to suit a certain demographic.
You just got knocked the fuck out!
I'm not saying Ryzen did this. but its storyline doesn't get you invested enough because of how it was designed. And sure, that's fine, the presentation was on the tin, but to take from a brilliantly, narratively well-written game just feels cheap to its humble beginnings. It's well known Kojima wanted the fans to think Raiden was cool, and in fact it backfired on him until MGS4 when Raiden makes his appearance as a badass Grey Fox clone.
Players actually did like Raiden, but we understand that overseas, US or Europe, players didn't kind of like Raiden. But I think that was wrong. The reason was that the people did not like Raiden was wrong. It was more of a frustration to Raiden that everyone wanted to play Snake, but didn't get to play Snake, so Raiden got the blame. Therefore, I wanted to prove by changing the perspective of how you can look at Raiden from a different angle and see that he's really cool. I wanted to kind of prove that by this trailer, by changing view, and now you get to see the cool parts of Raiden.
This time, assisting Snake as Snake did for Raiden in some poetic beauty. Mwah!
Snake, it's my turn to protect you.
The older I've gotten, I actually appreciated Raiden more because the story arc in MGS2 alone made him that badass. And slapping some cyborg gear on him, whilst cool and necessary for his story growth, just felt like fan catering, let's be honest. Kojima trying too hard to make a character that's already earned his spot in the series, if you ask me. It's the same for MGS5. Look how many of you guys were pissed off when you realised we weren't playing as Big Boss in MGS5. The same bait and switch pull as before, and now Venom Snake, like Raiden, has fickle people's attention. This is what happens when you have Kojima fully behind the presentation of a video game.
You're Big Boss.
It's not true. That's impossible.
Rather than giving it to someone who doesn't have a fucking idea. Of course, in Rising, Hideo Kojima was just the supervising director. He didn't write the storyline for it. Iitsu Tamarari is the one behind it. And he didn't do a bad job considering what he was working with. Hideo Kojima originally envisioned Metal Gear Rising Revengeance with Grey Fox, Frank Yeager, as the protagonist instead of Raiden. Kojima expressed a personal preference for Grey Fox, stating that if the game had featured him, he would have needed to write the script and be deeply involved in its creation, because Grey Fox is an essential piece into Kojima's lore, and he knows this, and he knows how much the fans love that character.
Ken, why? Because I'm the one who killed her parents. I was young then, and couldn't bring myself to kill her too. I felt so bad that I decided to take her with me. I raised her like she was my own blood to soothe my guilty conscience. Even now she thinks of me as her brother. Max.
However, the development team at Kojima Productions insisted on using Raiden, and Kojima respected their decision, allowing them full creative control over the project, which was fucking ridiculous. And some of their incompetence to actually fully respect Kojima's work is, I think, what we really saw. And this isn't me just nut-hugging the guy. Kojima even has some silly ideas. He proposed a storyline where Grey Fox would combat nanomachine-powered zombies, blending science fiction with horror elements. Naturally, that's what made his team disagree with him. But yet at the same time, later into the future, they'd make a game very similar to what Kojima envisioned. But what I don't get is his complete dismissal from his peers. Rather than taking the idea of Grey Fox and running with it and being like, Kojima-san, this is a great idea. But instead of the stupid fucking zombies, why don't we actually fill in the blanks in the essential pieces of the story? It's not like they didn't have anything to work from. Kojima acknowledged that, Grey Fox had been the central character, and that's important. He would have needed to be more directly involved in writing and directing this game, of course, which he aimed to avoid, to empower the younger generation of developers, which seems generous on one hand, but careless on the other. There's plenty of space for a game to have been made about Grey Fox after the Zanzibar experience that could have utilised Platinum Games mechanics in a hack-and-slash style game, because it would fit. Given that, after the incident, the Patriots recovered Frank's body and gave him an exoskeleton suit.
That exoskeleton?
And Eva and Naomi helped bust him out of facility and killed Dr. Clark, aka Paramedic. The entire ordeal had left Grey Fox's mind unstable, which caused a rapid deterioration of identity, and in this moment could have shown his arrival to Shadow Moses at the game's end. But hey, that's just my idea. Who cares?
Nobody cares.
Metal Gear Rising had a completely different story before it finally ended up as the one we know. This interquel aimed to bridge the narrative gap, focusing on Raiden's transformation from a human operative into the cyborg ninja as seen in MGS4. The central storyline revolved around Raiden's mission to rescue Sunny, the daughter of Olga, after the Big Shell incident. Sunny had been taken by the Patriots and held at Groom Lake at Area 51. You know, the Patriots' basis of operation apparently. Well, it is super secret. Raiden alongside the Patriots' Lost Army and characters like Big Mama and Boris orchestrated a infiltration to liberate her. This operation, known as the Raid at Area 51, was a pivotal event that not only secured Sunny's safety, but also deepened Raiden's entanglement with the Patriots. It would have tied the events that we were told in MGS4. And it's interesting because the same Boris is the one who assists Raiden over the codec in the final game that we actually got. And he really could have built on his character if they'd have actually placed it this way. Following Sunny's rescue, Raiden continued to collaborate with the Paradise Lost Army to retrieve Big Boss's remains. You know, the guys who tried to take on Snake CQC, this old guy, and he just completely wrecks them. However, during this endeavour, he was captured by the Patriots and subjected to extensive cybergenetic experimentation, just like Grey Fox, leading to his transformation into the cyborg warrior depicted in MGS4. The story was meant to delve into Raiden's psychological struggles, his past as a child soldier, and the moral complexities of all of his actions. The story was described as darker and much more mature, aiming to provide a deeper understanding of Raiden's character development, which is interesting because back in E3 2012's trailer we saw a young Raiden as a child soldier going through the transformative stages in his life. But because the project faced significant challenges, Kojima Productions found it difficult to design gameplay mechanics that complemented Raiden's high-speed swordplay whilst fitting with the established timeline. It's what led to the project's temporary cancellation. It's a real shame that Kojima Productions couldn't find a way to really make a statement here with the game, especially a crucial side piece of the story that would have been epic to see how some of the events of the Guns of the Patriots came around. It's even more saddening when it's said that Quentin Flynn tweeted that he had the pleasure of working with John Saigon, implying that Solidus Snake and of course Sunny were going to appear in the game. Of course Sunny does, but she doesn't exactly star in the game for very long apart from the ending.
But that's not the Raiden I know. The Raiden I know is a hero.
Solidus is mentioned in the game.
Program? Yep. Second one old Georgie boy used on the kids in Liberia.
But imagine seeing the story unfold as Raiden, with his struggles and his past and his dysfunctional relationship with Rose. It could have been presented way better. There could have been moments where, like what we play and what we see in the final game, where Raiden starts to break down and his alter ego Jack the Ripper comes out to play. Like a, Jekyll and Hyde. Imagine like a nightmare-like sequence where Raiden is having flashbacks as a young teenager, slashing through enemies under Solidus' command. This would have been a great way to reintroduce John Saigon, who played such an epic character, to reprise his role in a way that would have made sense.
Damn the Patriots!
Considering Solidus is technically a biomort after MGS2, they still could have included Raiden with the blade as in MGS2, and I mean, they managed to make that work fine enough for the PS2 with the gameplay mechanics even then. I mean, yeah, sure it wasn't as complex, but so what? Just imagine Eva giving Raiden radio support over the codec, talking about unrelated topics with her feelings over her sons, Big Boss, and Raiden's friendship with her son. All of this could have been happening whilst Raiden was infiltrating Area 51. And this also would have been a great way to include other characters that were in the final release of Metal Gear Rising on Raiden's end to be in this game, which would have made them far more loved. It's hard to continue the legacy of a game that is loved with its all previous characters and re-establish itself. You're better off just creating a new game. Otherwise, what's the point? The only best way I can describe this where this has actually worked is Capcom's Resident Evil, where we've got so many larger-than-life characters, and when Resident Evil re-established itself with Resident Evil 7 and 8 and we played as Ethan, it still tied in with the main storyline, well, because after all, it's in the timeline and universe of Resident Evil. It makes sense. I know the dynamics to Resident Evil is different to Metal Gear, but the fan base there would argue that all the characters are very important, and if there was a new game with a new character without connecting it to a essential piece of the lore, then it wouldn't really be Resident Evil. It's not just that, it's the dynamics of the game as well, the fact that Resident Evil still retains what's important about being a survival horror game. Imagine if Resident Evil turned into a hack and slash overnight, there'd be uproar. Metal Gear could have actually introduced all characters like Dr. Madnar from Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, who saved Raiden's life from the Patriots after they turned him into a cyborg ninja.
Dr. Madnar, he saved my life.
And who knows, maybe we could have played a section of Raiden's side of the story before he even meets Snake. I get there's, technical difficulties to make this happen, as explained by Kojima Productions, and it may have taken more time, but a great game often tends to be one that isn't rushed. For example, a lot of people complain about how long Rockstar takes to make their games, but when they finally release, they come out absolute bangers. So just imagine all of these concepts on the early stages of a proprietary in-house tools, which looked great by the way, prior to the Fox engine. By far the best looking and most refined gameplay mechanics we had out of the series in terms of what MGS5 delivered. It's understandable Kojima Productions had a tough time with implementing what exactly I mentioned, incorporating a blend of stealth and action. I mean, the line of work these guys do is incredible. But the fact is they needed Kojima, there as a leader, essentially a father figure, because the younger team at Kojima Productions couldn't possibly find a way to make it work. It just showed the problems they were facing. Unfortunately, as Kojima stated, he was involved in other projects like Peace Walker and the Fox engine. Kojima's team couldn't get the cutting system and the gameplay loop to work cohesively with the story, especially Raiden's morality and the cut what you will mechanic, which I believe should have just been scrapped for the sake of making a classic. Portable Ops was a perfect example of the team without Kojima making a fairly good effort at a great storytelling experience, because the game pretty much uses MGS3's mechanics and is on the PSP. So it's limited to more creative functions and gameplay, but as a story, it felt way more engaging and like a real Metal Gear story. I'm aware that it has its plot holes and contradicts previous entries in the series, but overall offers cool insight into Big Boss and eventually establishing Foxhound, his relationship with Zero, and meeting Colonel Campbell. There are quite a few issues that make people question the canon city, arguably with Grey Fox and the timelines of his age being off. Grey Fox, born in 1970, first met Big Boss as an orphan in the post-war Vietnam, situation, meaning 1975 or later. Big Boss took him under his wing and Frank would fight in the Mozambique and Rhodesia in the 70s. Portable Ops adds 10 to 20 years to his age, and you know the rest. And I could go on, but this isn't what this video is about. If one thing that MGS series has taught me is that given on how complex its story is, there is a lot of room for headcanon, and rightfully so. There's a problem in the MGS community where there's a sect who look to gatekeep and be dicks on what's right and wrong, and it just comes across as just, oh, I'm better than you, with arguments in comment sections trying to one-up each other. I mean, aren't we better than that? The narrator behind the whole game is unreliable. The Patriots like to mold history and take control of narratives and have the public or an individual belief of what they want. That was the beauty of MGS5. It was such a contradictory mess of interpretations with little room for facts. When you understand the themes of Orwell's 1984 behind it, things make a little more sense. Information can be interpreted in many ways. The point I make with Portable Ops is it clearly has some stance in the timeline of MGS.
Don't seem to be, according to the overall Metal Gear saga, that seem to be outside of this world. So, to put it in a way, I guess the main storyline of Portable Ops is part of the saga, is part of the official Metal Gear timeline, was some of the small details that are in Portal Ops are outside the saga, are not a part of, let's say, the main timeline of the game.
It's annoying because Kojima has never really been direct about it, and if it truly fits into the series, often regarding Ops as a spin-off, yet including snippets and, its art in MGS4 regarding Big Boss and the Patriots, I'll probably make a video one day going into further detail about Portable Ops and my take on why it's and how it's misunderstood. But my gripe is that Kojima had more interest in overseeing Portable Ops than he did MGS Rising, but yet can't decide if he approves or disapproves in it, but then puts it in his game.
On the other hand, was left with the problem. You only recovered half of the legacy. I had to locate the other half myself. When I found the funds, I passed them on to Zero, just as you wanted. I still trusted him in those days. We thought what he was doing was the boss's will.
My gripe is, if you'd have paid attention to Metal Gear Solid Rising just as much as he did Portable Ops in overseeing it, it might have been a completely different experience to the one we actually finally ended up with from Platinum Games. But if we look back to Portable Ops, he even seemed displeased with it, so it's almost strange how he'd hand it over to his team, once again to take over the creative process and really make a mess of it, because Portable Ops did have its plot holes. It's clear the team didn't fully do their research into the story of the game. I mean, come on, us guys could have done better than this. It just seems a tad contradictory on his end to be so protective over his work, but yet seems so freely giving to a younger team to do as they will with his epic story he's worked on so hard to craft. I mean, yeah, fuck me, I'm just a critic, Kojima's a genius, who am I to question, right? If anything, I owe it to the guy. I mean, partly of my work depends on what he's crafted. I mean, just like any other MGS content creator out there. We rely on memes to build our own future. Thank you, Kojima-san, for giving me the opportunity. Love you, dude. But now Kojima usually themes his games, right? And he does this quite often, and a lot of the times they're spot on. It's the foundation for everything that stems from it. Kojima clearly states the game's about revenge, but it's really not though, is it? Metal Gear Rising, or, Raiden's mission, for example, is not a mission for revenge, it's more like a mission for justice, for the unjust harming the vulnerable and the weak. Raiden had no reason for revenge. I doubt some president that he doesn't know or care about is going to be the reason why Raiden enacts revenge through the entire game. The story is completely nothing of this theme.
You cannot take on martial law by yourself.
I won't sit by while they butcher little kids and ship their parts around like meat. It's sick.
It's not all so simple, Raiden. They import those brains legally, for medical purposes. It's all done.
Being legal doesn't make it right.
However, in MGS5, Kojima perfectly presented revenge in a way that felt cohesive with the narrative. Big Boss and Kaz wanted revenge for Mother Base, and several other characters in the game, such as the antagonist, wanted revenge too. So dismissing MGS Rising's gameplay, which is fun, you can see the cracks of the development seep through its narrative. It's clear as day. Whilst Metal Gear Rising acknowledges its past, the story makes no sense at all, and that's the biggest issue I have with the game and the reason why I made this video. Raiden doesn't have no reason for revenge. His tragic history was resolved in MGS2 in terms of defeating the very thing that haunted him his entire life. As being a subject to Solidus, a twisted child soldier army, and finally getting vengeance for the death of his parents, and in MGS4 to destroy the Patriots for using him for their simulation. The series ends with MGS4, right? And it felt like a good way to close the book after a breathtaking experience. The reason why MGS5 gets a pass in my eyes is because it stays true to its lore and actually expands on it, introducing interesting storylines and characters. The game dug into its past because its future was already concluded, and it worked. Maybe not in the way MGS fans hoped for, if Kojima didn't invest so much in time and money into that empty open world. But credit to the man for doing something we'd never seen before, and I love that.
Still, doesn't feel like this is over.
The problem with Rising is that it sets itself after the events of MGS4. Some arcs of the story tell us Raiden has been contracted for VIP protection and military training, and other duties by a private military company, Maverick Security Consulting Incorporated, based in Colorado, helping out in developing country piecing itself back together after a bloody civil war. Raiden took the job largely to support his family without returning to direct combat situations. But this just destroys everything in Raiden's story arc and redemption from before. Why the fuck is Raiden returning to the battlefield after trying so hard to leave it behind him after everything he'd been through in MGS2? It's the kind of shit that even the best therapist couldn't help with.
I don't know whether to psychoanalyze you or take you down the vet and get you fucking put down.
You know, unlike Grey Fox, who couldn't escape from this, the idea was that Raiden could. Raiden is redeemed at the end of MGS2. The veil is lifted, a sense of clarity returns as Snake acts as his saviour, implying Raiden still has things left to do.
I get it. Analyze the code and you can probably find out where they operate. Count me in.
No, you have things to do first. And people you need to talk to.
That Raiden's life is valuable. He has something to go home to, unlike Snake, who is designed to be a weapon. Raiden's heart retains humanity while Snake's fate is sealed, but yet still has the chance to be free. It honestly reminds me of Red Dead Redemption 2. Arthur knows his time is running out and sees something in John that he once saw in himself. He does his best to get John out of his life of crime and go back to his family.
Go to your family. Arthur! Get the hell out of here and be a goddamn man. You're my brother. I don't know.
What made MGS4 so epic was Raiden's unexpected return. A haunting voice that sounds familiar.
Where are you now?
I'm right beside you.
Raiden, where have you been all this time? What have you been doing?
On a mission. Finding something. For someone.
A scenario we fans know all too well. What made his return work was that Raiden's soul still wasn't restored. He couldn't find purpose outside the battlefield, just like Grey Fox. He leaves everything behind, Rose and his kid, believing that little John was Campbell's. I mean, who knows? I mean, could have him and Rose and, you know, got busy?
Jesus slut.
It really showed how fractured Raiden still was. And Snake was like a brother. Raiden feels like he owes him for freeing him. Raiden becomes Snake's saviour, pointing all the way back to MGS2. But in the old age comes wisdom, as we see with Snake, a level that Raiden still can't understand. He acts recklessly, risking his life, whilst others wish so badly to keep him alive. He's strong on the surface, but deep down, he's a scared child wanting to be loved. We see that desperation as he clings to Snake's leg, and Snake tells Raiden some truths he wasn't yet ready to accept.
I've got nothing to lose.
Don't be an idiot. You know you've got someone to protect. You have a family.
I have no family.
Been alone.
Still fighting alongside Snake, Raiden sacrifices himself, a decision you can clearly tell he regrets in the last moment before screaming out for Rose. It's almost like in the face of death, only then does he realise what he's got.
Jack, do you remember the day we met?
Yeah, it was in front of Federal Hall. There were all these tourists around you.
They were asking me which building it was that King Kong was climbing in the movie. I said it was probably the Chrysler building. And then you showed up and started mouthing off. You were like, no, it's the Empire State.
I said the Chrysler building was in Godzilla.
We started arguing, and I forgot all about the tourists.
The next thing we knew, the tourists had gone away. And a week later, I found you again by coincidence out in the base corridor.
An amazing coincidence.
That night, we went up to the top of the Empire State Building.
It was so beautiful.
I didn't care anymore who was right.
And that was our first date.
We watched King Kong in your apartment a bunch of times that night. Didn't sleep till morning.
MGS4's story arcs, whilst silly at times and just contradictory, are emotionally charged. The connection between the characters really makes you feel their struggle and the pain of trying to put this chaos all to rest, but Raiden still persists with limbs missing, and Snake explains to him again at the end of the game that this is his fight.
Your body may be a machine, but your heart is human. You've got a life to go back to.
She means nothing to me now.
Raiden, look at me. You still have your youth. Don't waste it. You can start over. From here on, this is my fight.
This mess all started with Snake's story, and it's his final struggle to finally put it to rest. And it finally seems to sink in, but still Raiden fights to the death so his brother can cook, until Snake shuts down the Patriots once and for all with the help of Sonny, which spares Raiden from near death again, which is symbology in itself again. And at the finale of the game, Raiden makes his peace. He sees what's been in front of him this entire time. A chance to live his life, no longer fighting, to put down the weapon, to take care of his family. Big Boss's words don't just belong to Snake, they belong to Raiden too. And ultimately, it was Kojima's way of saying goodbye to the fans, because he was getting done with the game at this point. But what started as an incredible chapter of this legacy finally closes. Raiden, in the closing, admits he won't leave his family again. But Rising pulls him back into another suicide mission. It completely destroys the ending of all endings in gaming and contradicts the previous entry. So what the fuck is the point of Metal Gear Solid 4? That's a bit loud. Let's turn the volume down a bit.
Shut the fuck up, you cunt!
Honestly, Rising would have made more sense as one of Raiden's twisted nightmares in his little bedroom than the events that actually happened, if you ask me.
Nightmares. Every night. I can never forget.
Jack! I think the team did a poor job of writing this story, and the fact is, they needed Kojima there to help them. Isn't pride a bitch? It's a fractured game in many ways, but not a bad one in terms of style and genre. In fact, it's one of the funniest games you'll ever play. It's leaps and bounds ahead of that counterpart shit like MGS Survive, which was just complete crap.
Know your fucking place, trash!
It would have made a decent DLC, for multiplayer functions especially, rather than a separate game, in my opinion. What makes it worse than Rising is that it doesn't just contain any characters we're familiar with. To newcomers, that obviously might not matter, but to all-time fans knowing there's still games to be made that fill important gaps of the lore, it's just pitiful on Konami's part. And they never really have and probably never will honour the legacy of Metal Gear Solid. Chances are, from now on, they'll rely on the remake market to cash in on other games just as other companies do. Metal Gear Rising isn't the worst game in the series by any means, but it's not part of the legacy. If you ask me, it's fun, it's grungy, and it's got all the glory of what a hack and slash game can present with little MGS elements sprinkled on top. But it's not MGS. Plus, after the end of the Patriot system thanks to Fox Alive, we're left with the impression that the system of control, the SOP, the nanomachine regulated leash, is finally shut down. It pulls the plug on everything the Patriots used to suppress individual will, emotions, sensations, trauma. All of it had been filtered, numbered, and regulated. And the frogs, the female soldiers under SOP, serve as one of the clearest examples for that control throughout the game, because they're robotic, silent, emotionless, and synchronized like puppets. But at the end, when the system crashes, we finally see a shift. Even Drebin shows up at the wedding, and can now finally get drunk along with the other characters at Meryl's wedding. Nanomachines are now rendered inactive. And for the first time, people are given their true feelings back. The bullshit system is gone, the chains are broken.
It ain't that different from the Patriots.
That's right. The nanomachines used to keep you sober.
But then in Rising they seem to make a return, and that alone undermines the hard-fought victory in MGS4. It makes the sacrifice feel like it was just for nothing. Senator Armstrong is a prime example of this new application. His nanomachines infused heart distributes them throughout his body, turning him into this over-the-top Disney Pixar Republican character. Honestly, I was half expecting Woody and the gang to pop out and start giving Raiden backup.
Worked, fellas. Good job. Coming out of the ground. What a touch. That was a stroke of genius. Woody.
As well as being screamed at by a horde of liberals, since this guy is pretty much like the Republicans' wet dream of Donald Trump. But the whole thing is really amusing and great at times, and like I said, the best aspect of the story is Desperado and these larger-than-life characters that make it really good. I get it, whilst MGS4 depicted the end of nanomachines as tools for mass control, Rising shows their evolution into a means of a personal augmentation. It's a shift from systematic regulation to now individual empowerment. And maybe that's the point. When one awful regime ends, another begins, a new power structure, another ideology, another fight to be had. The cycle repeats again and again. That even after the reign of the Patriots, the war economy can't really just end overnight, and it's possible that it can always kickstart again. It's bittersweet once you understand what Metal Gear was intended to become in Kojima's eyes. Like so many others, I can't help but feel a quiet resentment towards Rising. Not just for what it is, but for what it replaced. The game was never meant to be the future of the series. It was supposed to carry forward the legacy of the boss and the Cobra Unit as main characters, diving deeper into the mythos that defined the soul of the saga. A game that was actually intended to be by Kojima, where the audience could actually play as a legendary boss and understand the legacy behind her great title. But the truth is, the project was handed over to the younger staff with little experience, and without Kojima's guiding hand, it was scrapped. And what we got instead was Metal Gear Rising, a flashy detour with no real direction, no reverence for what came before. And that's the problem, especially where the series stands today. It's really not in capable hands. Rising is a living testament to that failure. It's cheap, it's a quick thrill, a loud distraction for those who don't know what Metal Gear really is. It's a mistake, plain and simple, especially when you consider what could have been. With all that being said, I'd still love to know and hear your thoughts on the game down below. Leave a like or a dislike, whatever fits your take, and feel free to subscribe if this has resonated with you. Anyway, until we meet again.
Your mind is made? You will not come back.
Sorry, Boris.
I understand. But then, what will you do?